Here's a stat that I need you to hear. Recent research shows that women now negotiate their salaries at the same rate as men. In some studies, at even higher rates. We are asking. We've been told for years that the problem was that we don't ask. So we started asking. And what the data actually shows is that when we do, we get told no more often than men who make the exact same ask. Same words, same confidence, same role, different answer. The problem was never that we weren't asking. The problem is that the system penalizes us when we do. Women who negotiate are rated as less likable, less hireable, and harder to work with for doing exactly what they were told that they needed to do. And the women who don't negotiate, they earn somewhere between $700,000 and $1 million less over the course of their career. So you're punished for asking, and you're punished for not asking. That is not a you problem. That's a system problem. And this episode is going to give you the tools to navigate it anyway. I'm Sarah Caminiti, and this is episode 7 of The Career Strategist. I want to start with something that's going to reframe everything else I say today. When a company gives you a number, when that offer comes through, whether it's a formal letter or a casual, we're thinking around X, they are not telling you what you're worth. They are making an opening move in a negotiation, and they have been planning that opening move since before you submitted your application. Every company starts lower than they can go. Every single one. This is not cynical. It's just how compensation works. How it's always worked. How every hiring manager knows that it works. They build a range. They anchor to the bottom. And then they wait to see what you do. If you say yes immediately, they got what they wanted. If you push back, they were expecting that too. The money was already there. You either claim it or you leave it on the table. There is no version of this where asking makes things worse. There is only a version where you don't ask and then you spend the next few years wondering. I want to say one more thing before we go further, because I know some of you are already thinking, but I don't want to seem greedy, or I don't want to jeopardize the offer. And here's what I need you to hear. The people who think you're being difficult by asking about salary were planning to underpay you anyway. That is not a company you want to build a career with. And in my experience, pushback doesn't cost you the offer. It earns you respect because they just watched you advocate for yourself. And now they know you'll do the same thing for the role. Let's talk about timing. Because most people wait too long. Salary negotiation is not a thing that happens at the end of the process. It is a conversation that you manage from the very first interview. That's not aggressive. That is strategic. Because by the time you are 3 rounds in and emotionally invested and already imagining what your commute looks like, you've already shaped the negotiation you're going to have. You've either built leverage or you've eroded it. Here's what building it looks like. When you're deep in the first or second round conversation, when they're describing the scope of the role, the complexity of the problems, the scale of what they need, that is your moment, not at the end. Right there, right in the middle of intelligence gathering. The line I've used before is, given the complexity of what you're describing, I'm curious about the salary range budgeted for this role. Read that again. Budgeted for this role. Not, what are you offering? Budgeted. You're treating compensation as a business decision, not a personal ask. You're tying the range directly to the scope they just described to you. You are not grateful. You are strategic. Now, they will not always answer. Some of them will deflect. And when they do, you need to know what to say next. The deflection playbook has 3 main moves, and I want to give you a response to each one. Deflection 1. What are you making now? Do not answer this question. In many states, it's actually illegal to ask, which tells you something about why they're asking. What you're making at your current job has no bearing on what this role is worth. Those are 2 different jobs. If you make $60,000 and the role you're interviewing for is budgeted at $90,000, your current salary should not be the anchor. Your response? I'd rather not anchor to the value of this role and what the market looks like for this kind of scope. Do you have a range in mind? Deflection 2. What are you hoping for? This is a more polite version of the same trap. They want you to name a number first, so they can either come in below it or feel relieved when they don't have to go higher. Don't take that bait. Your response? I'm sure you have a range in mind for this position. I'd love to understand how that aligns with the market and the scope that we've discussed. Again, this has nothing to do with feelings. 0 to do with feelings. Deflection number 3. We'll get into compensation if you move forward. This one is designed to make you feel like asking right now is premature. It is not premature. It is professional. Your response? Of course. I just want to make sure that we're aligned on the value of this role before we both invest more time. It helps me come in prepared. That last line does something important. It takes the pressure off. You're not being difficult. You're being efficient. You're making sure neither of you waste your time on something that isn't going to work. Any reasonable employer will hear that and respect it. Now, the offer comes. I don't care if the number feels good. Push back anyway. I'm serious. Even if it's above what you expected, even if you're excited, even if your first instinct is to say yes immediately because you don't want to lose it. And here's why. You don't know where they started. You don't know how much room is still in that range. The number that feels good to you might still be $15,000 below what they had available. You will never know unless you ask. The line I use when the offer comes is, I've been really excited about this opportunity throughout the process, and I appreciate the offer. After looking at everything this role entails, the scope we discussed, the challenges I'd be coming in to address, I was actually thinking this aligns more with higher range. Are you open to a conversation about the base? There's a few things about this language. Notice, you are not apologizing. You're not starting with, I'm sorry, I know this might be a lot to ask. That is something that I've said before. No, not this time. You're stating your position. You're tying it to the scope and the challenges, which they told you about. And then you're asking an open question that invites a conversation rather than forcing a yes or a no. Are you open to a conversation about the base? Is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It's not, can you go higher? It's, are you willing to have this dialogue with me? Most of the time, they will say yes, because of course they are. That's why there's a range. I want to give you a story that changed the way I thought about this permanently. Early in my management career, I had a job offer I was genuinely excited about. The number wasn't exactly what I hoped for, but I liked the team, the scope felt right, and I was afraid that pushing back would signal something. Neediness, maybe, or arrogance. I hadn't yet found the language that I'm giving you today. I almost said yes, but instead, and I'm still not entirely sure why I did this, but I just blurted out, is there any wiggle room here? That was it. That was the entire ask. No emotion, no range, no number, no strategic framing. 6 words. My future boss took 2 days, came back, and the number was $30,000 higher. $30,000 higher. Nothing else changed in the offer. I didn't name a number. I didn't frame anything. I just asked if there was room. There was room. There is almost always room. And the only question is whether you give them permission to use it. Now let's flip things around a little bit. I want to tell you what this looks like from the other side of the table, because I've been on both sides of the conversation, and the view from the hiring manager seat will change how you see this, hopefully, forever. When I give job offers, I do start lower than what I want the person to take. I'll say that one more time, because that probably sounds very much in conflict with everything that I talk about. I start lower than what I want them to take. Not the lowest possible number, but a little bit below middle of the range, because I want them to push back. I want them to know they were in it, that they advocated for themselves, that they didn't leave money on the table. I want them to start this job feeling so proud of themselves. That matters for how they show up on day one. I have sat across from candidates after making an offer and thought, please, please, please push back, please. I have had to physically stop myself from following up and saying something, because that would almost certainly be a legal conflict of interest, and I've been advised accordingly. So I stay quiet and I wait. Some candidates push back, some don't. The ones who don't, I do wonder if they realize what they left behind. Not because I'm withholding it to punish them for not asking, but because the offer I made was a starting point. It was a starting point to a conversation. And they skipped the conversation and they accepted it as the final answer. The number is not the ceiling. It is almost never the ceiling. And here's what I want you to take from this. Even managers who respect you, even managers who want you to succeed, even managers who are rooting for you, they're still going to start with a number that has room in it, because that's how compensation works. It's not personal, it's structural. And the structure rewards people who understand it. And I will also say, no matter who I hire, if they are looking to exit, if they're starting to interview, if they're thinking about the future, I talk to them about negotiation. I talk to them about the importance of pushing back in those conversations, having a conversation, becoming comfortable with a conversation so that the next time they walk away knowing that they got the money that was on the table. They didn't just leave it there. Now let's talk about raises, because most people negotiate the offer and then never have this conversation again. And that is where the real money gets left behind. Before you accept any offer, you have to ask about future earning potential. This is not an afterthought. This has to be part of the same conversation. The questions you need answers to are there annual cost of living raises? Are they guaranteed, or are they subject to performance and budget and things outside of your control? And are they written into the contract? This matters more than people realize. A verbal assurance that we do annual raises is not the same as a number tied to a policy or a clause in your agreement. I have worked for people who sounded completely genuine when they described their pay practices. I have also worked for people who actually practice things that look nothing like what they described in the interview. If you want the specifics in writing, or you want a clear picture of the written policy, you have to bring it up yourself. And you have to do it before you say yes. The second question: when was the last time your compensation bands were updated? This is a very revealing question because you'll learn a lot about a company's culture and how they think about investment in their employees. A company that hasn't revisited its bands in 3 years has been slowly underpaying everyone on the current scale while the market moved on. That's a yellow signal. Minimum. A company that reviews annually and ties it to market data is telling you something about how they see the relationship between the work and the pay. Third, what does the promotion path look like for this role, and what's the typical timeline? You're not asking because you're already thinking about leaving. You're asking because you need to know whether growth is real or theoretical. If they can describe the path, specific titles, specific skill thresholds, typical timelines, examples of people who've moved through it, even better if they want to introduce you to someone that has moved through it to talk to them about it, that's meaningful. That is very meaningful. If the answer is, it really depends on performance and opportunities as they come up, that is not a path. That is deflection, and that is a holding pattern. If they can't answer these questions clearly, go back to the room color frameworks from episode 6. The inability to describe how money works inside an organization is almost never about disorganization. It's about power. They don't want you to know. Or they haven't thought about it because they haven't had to, because they don't value the employees enough to dedicate the time to do it. Either way, that's information. I want to talk about something that's been used against people in ways they've internalized without realizing it. Job hopping. The stay at least 2 years or you'll look like a job hopper rule. I want to take it apart because it is one of the most effective pieces of career mythology that has ever been deployed to keep talented people underpaid. Here's what's true. The average annual raise from staying at a company is somewhere in the range of 3 to 4%. That barely keeps pace with inflation. That is, in many years, not even a real raise. It's a maintenance payment. Meanwhile, research consistently shows that people who change jobs typically see salary increases in the range of 10 to 20%, sometimes more. Those are not the same math. The loyalty economy has always been asymmetrical. Companies restructure. They lay people off. They eliminate roles and departments with very little notice and a severance that you have to decide whether to sign before you've had any time to think. They move on from people who've given years of their lives without a second thought. That's not a judgment. We see this every day. This is a business reality. But it raises a real question about why we operate like we owe them something they are not required to offer us. I've job hopped. I will not pretend that I haven't. And here's what I can tell you. It has never, not once, come up negatively in an interview. What has come up every time are the skills I gained, the problems I solved, the experience I built by moving through different environments instead of staying in one place waiting to be given more. The job hopper conversation that interviewers allegedly have, in my experience, what they're actually evaluating is whether you have a coherent story about why you moved and what you gained. That's just a preparation problem. That has nothing to do with loyalty. If you can articulate what each move taught you, and you can, because you're building that clarity right now, the timeline becomes almost irrelevant. When should you leave? The moment that the growth stops. The moment the environment turns red and isn't changing. The moment you realize you've been in a survival job for longer than survival required. not because you owe them nothing, but because you owe yourself the next chapter. I opened this episode with a stat about the penalty that women face for negotiating, and I want to come back to it here because it directly affects how you use everything that we just went over. The backlash is real. It's documented. And I'm not going to pretend that the tactics alone erase it. But here's what the research also shows. And this matters. The framing changes the outcome significantly. When women tie the ask to the role's scope and market value, rather than what they want, or what they need, or what they feel, the backlash drops. You are not asking for a favor. You are presenting a business case. Every piece of language I've given you today is built with that in mind. Given the complexity of what you're describing is doing work. The scope we've discussed, that is doing work. How this aligns with the market is doing work. You are speaking the language of the room. And the room responds differently to that than it does to, I feel like I deserve more. Both may be equally true. Only one is strategically positioned. And the fact that you have to think about this at all, the fact that the same words land differently depending on who says them, that is the system working exactly as designed. You navigating it is not selling out. It's surviving long enough to change it. Because if you ignore it, it stays. If you ignore it, you're saying that this is okay. It's not okay. So, here are 3 practices for this week. These are the most concrete of the season. Things to do, not just think about. Practice number 1. Before your next offer, your next salary conversation, or annual review, write down the number you actually want. Not the number you think is realistic, not the number that you'd settle for, the number you would say yes to immediately and feel genuinely good about. Then write down the number you're going to ask for first, which should be higher than the number that you'd accept. The gap between those 2 numbers is your negotiating room. If you haven't created any gap, then you've already given it away. Practice number 2. Practice 3 different deflection responses out loud, not in your head. You have to say these out loud. You have to feel what it feels like to have it come out of your mouth. Saying, I'm sure you have a range in mind for this position. I'd love to understand how that aligns with the market and the scope that we've discussed. In your living room, to your mirror, to whoever will listen, that is different from reading it on a page. The goal is for it to feel like your words, not a script that you're reciting. Your words. You got to keep repeating it until that discomfort fades. The discomfort is just the gap between where you are and where you're going. That discomfort is change. Practice 3. If you're currently employed, find out when your compensation was last benchmarked against the market. Not your last review, when the company last looked at whether what they're paying you reflects what the market actually pays for your role. If you don't know, ask. If the answer is vague or years ago, that's data. You can use it in your next review conversation. You can also use it to decide whether you're going to get the number that the market says that you're worth, since apparently your current employer hasn't checked lately. This episode has been about tactics. And I want to be direct with you. The tactics matter. They really do. You can know everything from episodes 1 through episode 6, all of it. The values precision, the room colors, the authority test, all of it. And still leave the money on the table if you don't have the specific language ready when the moment comes. And the thing underneath the tactics that I want you to carry out of this episode is that the negotiation does not feel hard because you don't know the words. It feels hard because somewhere along the way, you got the message that asking for what you're worth was presumptuous, that there was something unseemly about naming a number in your own favor, that staying grateful was the same as staying safe. It is not the same. And you know that now. Salary is a power negotiation. Full stop. Every employer knows this. Every hiring manager knows this. The people across the table from you have been trained in it. And you deserve to be too. You walked into episode 6 knowing how to evaluate the room. You walked into this episode knowing how to name your worth inside of it. Both of these things together, that's a different kind of person than the one who took whatever was offered and told herself to be grateful for it. That person was not wrong. She just didn't have this yet. Next week, we go into the daily work. Now that you know your worth and you can say the number, next week we talk about what happens every other day of the year. How to speak without shrinking once you're inside the room you chose. The authority ladder, the language that claims power versus the language that quietly hands it away. And the thing that most people do in meetings without realizing it, that tells everyone in the room exactly how much authority to give them. That's episode 8. And the foundations that we've been building all season long is exactly what makes this possible. I'm Sarah Caminiti. This is The Career Strategist. You are capable of so much more than you realize, and I am so happy that you're here. I'll see you next week.